Okay, so are you ready to dive into some local South African politics?
Always up for a challenge.
Yeah,
Where are we headed?
Klerksdorp.
Klerksdorp, okay.
Yeah, we're looking at a transcript from a recent mayoral Imbizo there.
Imbizo.
Basically, like a town hall. Residents get to air their grievances, ask tough questions, that sort of thing.
Sounds lively. And Klerksdorp,
That's Northwest Province. It's got this long history tied to mining, but like a lot of places, facing some serious challenges these days.
Right, makes sense. So this Imbizo, what's the kind of the overall vibe? What are we hoping to glean from this deep dive?
Well, I think the mayor really set the tone from the get-go. He emphasized that it wasn't just about listening to complaints. It was about, collective problem solving.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, at one point he even used this analogy. He said the city is like a basket of apples.
A basket of apples.
Yeah, some are good, some are bad, but the bad ones can spoil the whole bunch, right?
Ah, I see. So he's saying they need to identify those rotten apples, whatever those might be, and deal with them.
Exactly. And it's not always clear cut, right?
Yeah.
But it speaks to that need for action, for accountability.
Definitely. So what were some of the bad apples that came up? What had people fired up?
Well, crime was a big one, dominated a lot of the conversation.
Not surprising, unfortunately. It's a major concern in many cities.
Yeah, and the mayor didn't mince words. He actually called Klerksdorp infested with crime at one point.
Wow, he really went there. That's a strong statement from a mayor.
Right, so it's serious. But it wasn't just about, doom and gloom. What I found interesting was his emphasis on partnerships, working with private security, neighborhood watches, anyone who can help.
Okay, so kind of a we're all in this together approach.
Exactly. He even thanked those groups for their efforts. But then he kind of dropped a bit of a bombshell when he started talking about non-compliant shops.
Non-compliant shops? What does that even mean?
I'm not sure how you read between the lines, but it felt like there was some tension there, maybe directed at foreign-owned businesses. He talked about stricter bylaw enforcement, searching every little corner to ensure safety.
I see. Yeah, you could definitely feel the tension building there just from those words. That's a very sensitive topic.
For sure. And, speaking of sensitive topics, service delivery was another big one.
The old potholes and streetlights.
Yeah. Oh, you know it. Potholes, sewer spills, streetlights, the whole 9 yards. It was like listening to a greatest hits of everyday problems.
And you can't blame residents for getting frustrated, right?
Yeah.
Especially when it feels like those problems just don't get solved.
Absolutely. But what struck me was the mayor's repeated emphasis on accountability. He kept saying officials need to get out of their offices and into the streets to really see these issues firsthand.
Less talk, more action.
Exactly. He even joked that he only wears suits for council meetings, that he prefers his wetsuit for being out in the community.
Okay, gotta love a politician who's not afraid to get their hands dirty, right?
Yeah.
At least figuratively.
Right. But all jokes aside, he was serious about the need for on-the-ground solutions. He also addressed the city's financial constraints, basically saying, look, we can't do everything. Resources are limited.
Right. Got to prioritize.
Exactly. And that's where his whole basket of apples analogy comes back in, and got to figure out which problems are causing the most rot and tackle those first.
Makes sense. So limited resources, big problems. What's the game plan? Did anything concrete come out of this Imbizo?
Well, unemployment was a huge talking point, a major, major theme throughout. And one thing the mayor said really stood out to me. He said he's striving for a future where employment is based on merit, not connections.
Okay, a noble goal for sure, but also easier said than done, right?
Right, and I couldn't help but notice a bit of a contradiction there.
How so?
Well, you have this sky-high unemployment rate on one hand, and on the other hand, you have this massive potential for job creation. Through those very service delivery improvements we just talked about, fixing potholes, upgrading infrastructure, that kind of thing, those projects create jobs.
Right, yeah, so it's like a catch-22. They need resources to create jobs, but those resources are strained because of the lack of jobs. It's a tough cycle to break. But it does sound like there are some potential solutions buried in this Imbizo, some glimmers of hope.
Absolutely. And one that really jumped out at me was actually related to this whole service delivery backlog. Apparently, there's this massive backlog of municipal statements.
Statements, utility bills.
And thousands of them just sitting there undelivered.
Wow. Okay, so what's the holdup? Why aren't they going out?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
But get this, one of the residents actually proposed a solution. Hire unemployed youth to deliver them.
Interesting. So kill two birds with one stone. Young people get jobs, residents get their bills, the city improves revenue collection.
Exactly. It's like crowdsourcing good governance, right?
Yeah.
And it speaks to the level of detail that residents were bringing to the table. Like, it wasn't just vague complaining, you know? They came armed with street names, dates, even figures.
Oh, they came prepared.
They were ready to hold those officials accountable. And speaking of accountability, things got a little tense when the topic of property rates came up.
Property taxes, what happened there?
Well, it seemed like there were some, shall we say, discrepancies between what was promised and what actually happened.
The old bait and switch. So what's the deal? Did they hike them up without warning?
It sounds like there was a significant increase. Yeah. And, you know, I get it. Cities need revenue to function, right? But it's another thing to have these sudden jumps that haven't been properly communicated or justified.
Right. Transparency is key. People deserve to know how their money is being spent and why.
Exactly. And when things feel arbitrary or, you know, contradictory to previous promises, it just erodes trust.
For sure. So did the mayor address these concerns, or was it just a whole lot of finger pointing?
To be fair to him, he did own up to some of the city's shortcomings. Like, he admitted that resources are stretched thin, that certain systems are outdated. He even talked about the need to improve communication with residents.
Okay, so at least he's acknowledging there are problems. That's a start, right?
It is. And, you know, it's kind of refreshing to hear a politician admit they don't have all the answers. Makes them seem more human.
True. But it also raises the stakes. It's one thing to acknowledge problems. It's another to actually outline a clear plan to address them.
Right. Actions speak louder than words and all that.
Exactly. So did this Imbizo move beyond just airing grievances? Was there any actual brainstorming, any talk of solutions?
Oh, absolutely. You could feel the energy shifting as things went on, you know? From venting frustrations to, like, hey, what can we do about this?
That's what I like to hear. Because that's what these Imbizos are all about, right? Getting everyone, officials and residents in the same room, facing those challenges head on, and hopefully coming up with some solutions together.
Exactly. And one idea that really caught my attention was this whole thing about the old Klerksdorp airport.
The airport, what about it?
Well, it's basically been sitting there unused for years, right? Kind of a ghost airport, as someone put it. And one of the residents proposed developing that area.
Okay, interesting. What do they have in mind?
Well, they didn't get into specifics, but the idea was that with some strategic investment, it could be transformed into some kind of economic hub.
Okay, so potentially boosting the local economy, creating jobs.
Exactly.
It's ambitious, that's for sure.
Ambitious, but that's what you need, right? That kind of forward thinking. Because it's easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day struggles, the potholes and the backlogs and all of that. But you also need that bigger vision, that sense of possibility.
Absolutely. You need both. And it sounds like this Imbizo, at least to some extent, managed to touch on both.
I think so. I mean, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, you know? There were definitely some heated moments.
Oh, I bet. I'm trying to imagine a room full of people talking about property taxes and not getting a little heated.
Right. Like, at one point, someone straight up questioned the city manager's qualifications.
Oh, wow. Did things get awkward?
You could cut the tension with a knife. But I have to hand it to the mayor. He didn't shut down the conversation or get defensive. He engaged with it.
It takes a certain kind of leader to do that, to stay calm, collected, and open to those tough questions, even when you're in the hot seat.
Right, and I think that's what gives me hope, you know? Because for all the back and forth, the accusations, the frustrations, you could also feel this underlying current of, like, we want this to work, we want our city to thrive, and we're willing to have these tough conversations to make that happen.
It's that shared sense of responsibility, that collective desire for something better. And it sounds like this Imbizo, in its own messy way, managed to tap into that.
For sure. And sometimes that's all it takes, right? That spark of hope, that willingness to keep the conversation going, to keep pushing for change, even when it feels like you're wading through a whole lot of
bad apples.
Exactly. A whole lot of bad apples, a whole lot of tough conversations. But hey, that's democracy for you, right?
Messy, challenging, but ultimately essential.
Exactly. And you know, through it all, what really stuck with me was the mayor's closing message. It wasn't about dwelling on the negatives or pointing fingers.
What was his message then?
It was a call to action. Like, we've heard the complaints, we have acknowledged the problems now, let's shift our focus to solutions. Let's move from individual grievances to collective action.
Okay, I like that. From complaining to problem solving.
Right. Because it's easy to get stuck in that cycle of negativity, you know. But Real change, lasting change, requires us to move beyond that. It requires us to roll up our sleeves and work together.
Absolutely. It's about taking ownership, taking responsibility for building the kind of future we want to see.
Exactly. And, it would be easy to walk away from this Imbizo feeling overwhelmed, discouraged, right? Just thinking about the sheer scale of the challenges they're facing.
Yeah, I can see that.
But for some reason, I actually feel kind of hopeful.
Oh, why is that?
Because what we've witnessed here, for all its flaws, for all those heated moments, is democracy in action. It's messy, it's raw, it's real. But it's those conversations, those sometimes uncomfortable confrontations, that are the foundation for progress. And what really gives me hope is that these residents, they're not shying away from that. They're showing up, they're speaking their minds, they're demanding better for their community.
They're engaged, they're invested.
Exactly. And that, to me, is incredibly powerful because it shows that even in the face of these immense challenges, that spark of hope, that belief in the power of collective action, it's still there. It's alive and well in Klerksdorp. And you know what? That's something worth celebrating.
I'll raise a glass to that.
Yeah.
To engage citizens, tough conversations, and that persistent belief that things can get better.
Here. And to everyone listening, whether you're in Klerksdorp or halfway across the world, the message is the same. Get involved. Speak up. Be a part of the solution. Because change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in isolation. It requires all of us.
Well said.
So that's it for our deep dive into the Klerksdorp Mayoral Imbizo. We hope you found it as insightful and maybe even as inspiring as we did. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions, keep the conversations going, and keep diving deep.
See you next time.
Cheers to that.